Welcome back and welcome to Talk of the Nation. Starting Monday, parents will start the slow but arduous task of taking their children back to school, mostly in phases. Now, all this comes at a time when the economy is going through several challenges. For instance, schools have realized the need to raise tuition due to the high cost of living, but parents are hard-pressed to meet the schools halfway due to their own diminished standard of living. Now, to help us appreciate this, we do have Allana Kembabazi, a program manager with the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights. Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Yes. So, Allana, times are hard, you know. Yeah. Schools are stuck between a rock and a hard place, you know, with whether to increase tuition fees, you know, for the students. On the other hand, also parents are struggling when it comes to, you know, the economy and the high cost of living. What do you think is the solution here, you know, for both parties not to be affected, but yet again, every other person has to walk away happy?
Yeah, I think right now the math in Uganda is not mathing. Like, the cost of living is just ridiculous. I had a very rough morning myself, you know, from the charcoal to and I saw beans at 5,000 a kilo. You just begin.
Previously it was at what price?
It was, I think, 3,000, you know, and you look at these things. If you used to buy a sack of charcoal at 100, now it's like 130, 150.
It was 60,000 before.
You know, at some point it was 60,000, 80. So if we who are, I would say, relatively privileged are feeling the pinch, then how is everyone else doing? Remember, this is a country where only 1% of Ugandans earn above 1 million. Now, with whatever you're earning below, how are you able to even survive? And when it comes down to the schools right now, they're also feeling the pinch. But they can't raise the fees because people's salaries are not getting raised, right? Because people are also feeling a pinch at home. We know that people have been, there's been a real risk in food insecurity, with people having less meals per day. So for a school owner, particularly private schools that have been talking about this, and I know this discussion even got to Parliament, it's hard to balance. We also know that they've been having a lot of debt, which shows people can't pay. So it's a situation that shows more than ever that we need government to intervene on this cost of living crisis. You know, we've called for them to intervene, and they've said why they can't intervene, and they're holding steady. The only intervention they've really given is to go and raise our interest rates. The Bank of Uganda raised the CPR, which therefore made borrowing more expensive, and their idea was that this would kind of hopefully rein in a bit of the inflation by reducing demand. But this is not an issue of demand. People don't have money. It's an issue of supply constraints. Like, I was trying to understand today why are beans so expensive. Like, what happened? Oh, the weather failed. Also, the cost of fuel. And we've been saying this, the cost of fuel. Some of us, you know,
so you're asking for the government interventions. What would you exactly want the government to do for us in such a situation, in your take?
Yeah, ISER always say that, you know, we think that the starting point for this conversation matters, because if we recognize someone has a right to food, education, and you have to safeguard it, it means you must intervene when that right is getting threatened. And for many Ugandans right now, that is actually what is happening. So here are a few things I think government could do. One, I think it should have quality public services. We know that even now, some of you are taking your kids to school tomorrow, but you don't know how you're going to do it. But those who are in government schools, if we had a real, you know, we talk about Zambia where they're saying everyone go to school with no fees, you would say, like, life is hard, but my kids are going. And then, you know, and that would be better. But right now, we don't have functional public schools in this country that are at the level that they should be, which is a shame. The president keeps talking about you having very little actual action. So if we had that, if we had proper, you know, it's not about rail, public transport, then transporting food would be cheaper. But those are more long-term things. You also have to cushion people right now and meet them where they are. And we have said this, we have said, you people, there is a role for targeted subsidies around fuel, such that, because people kept saying it will only help the rich, but you're now seeing that when you don't address this cost of fuel, It is not only impacting the rich, it's not only impacting me who drives a car. The public transport, now the kids going back, public transport costs. The bins, the charcoal, all of those things, everything when you're adding up, the border guy is adding, it is impacting everyone. So I keep saying this to the friends that, you know, whether it's Bank of Uganda, Ministry of Finance, all of you who are seated around the table, the IMF, I know the IMF has not been a fan of subsidies. You need to get back to this and actually think. People have a breaking point. You know, in South Africa, there were protests this week, literally this week, on the cost of living crisis. People have a breaking point. So we need to see the government actually take action. We continue to call upon you. The actions you have taken right now are not enough for Ugandans. You have said we wait it out. People, we have waited. We've been waiting since January. It is August, actually September to next week. So at what point do you have some interventions for us?
Okay, so with all this going on in our economy, there are concerns that this situation that we are in could probably be attributed to the excessive borrowing that the government has been undertaking. Do you share the same concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been raising the alarm on our rising debt for a couple of years, and this is actually what we feared. Because when you have so much debt, your focus becomes on keeping your creditors happy. Therefore, you'll have less fiscal space to respond. Like now, one of the things government has said on why it can't respond, some of the things, it doesn't have money. You even saw what happened with the budget. They approved the budget, then they delayed the release. They're saying, no, we are putting it off in the next quarter. Even parish model, you had. It's supposed to be 100, but no, now we're going to give you 25 or whatever. Because they're saying that they also want to not have too much money in the economy. It's also because they don't have money. And why? Let's look at the numbers. We spend 44 trillion a day servicing our debt. That could, so 5 days of servicing our debt could actually, I think it's actually not for 44, it's 44, it's 41 billion. But 5 days of servicing our debt could actually finance social protection for a year. And that means that when people have shocks like this, you're actually able to do something. But now you cannot, because you have to service your debt. It means that we are currently spending more on servicing our debt than we spend on health, education, water, social protection, like combined. When you get those budgets combined,
even the public servants here are affected, you know, when it comes to pay.
Absolutely. And I've had a lot of talk about rationalizing and sort of downsizing. All those come because you had a very big appetite for borrowing. And what is really sad about this situation is a lot of these loans, so a lot of these loans are taken without, they flaunt some procedures, then there is delayed release of money. You saw in Parliament this week they were talking about the Karamoja one. That was a painful one that was taken at the height of the pandemic in 2020. And if you're in Karamoja, you will know that one of the things they lack in places like Amudat or whatever is they have no health facilities. They really struggle. And this loan is given. And Parliament was recently asking them to come and explain to them what happened. And there were two things that stood out for me, you know. They first of all signed it without seeking the legal opinion of the Attorney General. Then they failed to coordinate between Ministry of Finance and the Chief Advisor of Government. And therefore, you know, we are coming at a point when we should have absorbed the money, and we haven't. So you're delaying to absorb the money. We're still going to have to pay it back. In fact, when you delay to absorb it, it becomes more costly for us as a country.
Sometimes even the money is borrowed and it is not used for what it is actually borrowed for.
Exactly. And we know that with COVID-19 money. That is a good example, actually, because COVID-19 money, a big chunk of it, which most people don't know, from these international financial institutions, was actually loans.
Okay.
And so you can imagine if you've taken a rapid credit facility and people think they're going to get some cushioning from Uganda Development Bank, and it decides to use it for a strategic plan, on all the issues that the Office of the Attorney General has a whole report on COVID-19 money being misused. The sad reality is, you misuse the money, so we lack the public services now. Then we still have to go back and pay the money in the future. Meanwhile, we're not even consulted as citizens when you took this money, because I gave you an example of the ways in which you flaunt procedure. And in the future, we are going to still be in situations like this, where people are going to put servicing of the debt ahead. So I'm worried about our health system of the future, actually, because I look at the numbers, and if we are already spending more on servicing debt now than health care and education, what is going to happen for our children? you know, and yet we know that more than ever that life changes very quickly. You know, your debt is a certainty. Whatever you borrowed is there, you have to pay it. You begin to say, oh yeah, it's sustainable because GDP, so forth. All those things are future projections. You're hoping your export earnings are fine. You're hoping the economic outlook is fine. Now we have Russia, Ukraine. We had nothing to do in Uganda with Russia, Ukraine. And now, you know, we are here in shambles.
Allana,
so,
just to wrap this up, what do you think could be the solution to this? You know, should government continue the borrowing? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we might need the money. Or do you think they could find an alternative, you know, to dealing with the extra money that they need to spend on, you know, the various sectors they are spending on?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we need to have a human rights impact assessment of our debt. We've been saying that because whenever we assess our debt, we look at it in purely economic terms, export earnings, that kind of thing. But we don't look at the impact it will have on regular Ugandans. That is why we can say it is sustainable, like we're saying. Right now, if you go and check, our books say medium-term sustainability, even the ratings, because they just look at, can you still make your payments, but at whose cost? So first of all, we have to change how we think about sustainability. So that means when members of parliament are looking at these loan requests, they're not just sticking to a script that they've been given by finance, they're actually saying, how is this going to impact our healthcare in the future? How is it going to impact our education in the future? So first of all, it's changing our assessment of it. Number two, ensuring there is participation and people are being heard on some of these loans. Some of these things are just, you can see it's a red flag, it's unnecessary, it's problematic. It will only privilege a few. Why are you going ahead and servicing it with a loan? And then number three, I think we need to just reduce this unwarranted expenditure, like you've said. There are loads of loopholes, tax exemptions that allow us to lose a lot of money. So we could really strengthen our domestic revenue mobilization, like you said.
Thank you, Allana Kembabazi, our program manager with the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, getting to share her thoughts on the current economic situation. Thank you so much. We do take a break and return with NTV Weekend Edition.